A young female soldier vanished after a night out, leaving behind only one final text message and countless unanswered questions.
We never gave up on her, and I love her more than anything. And that bringing her home was something I promised her I would do, and I would never let her down.
No witnesses, no body, no answers. As the case grew cold and police nearly gave up the search, one private investigator did not, and ultimately uncovered the truth, using methods that were quite unconventional. Kelly Bordeaux was born in December 1988. She grew up in sunny St. Cloud, Florida. It might sound unusual to say this about a young woman, but Kelly dreamed of serving in the military. She enlisted at the age of 22, in the year 2011. After completing basic training, she was sent to North Carolina to train as a medic. She was assigned to the 601st Area Support Medical Company.
She was a medic with the 601st Brigade out of Fort Bragg. Being a combat medic was natural for Kelly because she loved helping people.
She genuinely loved her job and planned to pursue a long-term military career. That fact makes this mystery even more compelling because Kelly was far from the stereotypical soldier. In high school, she had been a cheerleader and a homecoming queen. With her striking looks, she constantly attracted attention from young men, so much so that her brother and sister often had to step in to chase them away.
Boys were like trying to flirt with her. Oh, they'd pick her up and I'd just look at them and they knew, put her down, like don't touch her again.
Kelly's outgoing, fun-loving personality made her one of the most popular girls in her hometown of St. Cloud, Florida. Before joining the Army, in the year 2010, Kelly married a man named Mike Bordeaux in St. Cloud. They were both around 20 years old at the time. Together, they settled into an apartment just outside the military base where Kelly was stationed. But married life was far from easy. Only 3 months after the wedding, the first major cracks appeared in their young marriage. Mike struggled to find a job. He had no steady income and began drinking heavily, day after day, with little concern for the future.
I am a big alcoholic. I was really bad.
The marriage grew increasingly strained under the pressure, and eventually, Kelly made the difficult decision to separate from him. Mike returned alone to Florida, while Kelly stayed behind in Fayetteville completely on her own, knowing no one there except her fellow soldiers at Fort Bragg. But Kelly's personal life was about to become far more complicated and deeply tangled. For nearly a year during the separation, Kelly secretly carried on an affair with a man named Justin Thompson, a friend she had known since her days in St. Cloud, Florida, before joining the military. Justin treated Kelly with respect and gave her space when she wanted to try to salvage her marriage. He even planned to move to North Carolina to be with her, since he was still living in Florida at the time. According to Kelly's sister, Olivia, Kelly cared deeply for Justin. She eventually decided to divorce Mike, who had no idea that his estranged wife was involved with another man.
I think the plan was eventually, like once she was officially on paper divorced, is Justin come and be there and see what the relationship can turn into.
In April of 2012, Justin flew to North Carolina to check out the area and discuss moving in together with Kelly. One evening, while out together, they stopped by a casual local bar called Froggy Bottoms. They had a few drinks and chatted with locals. A few days later, Justin returned to Florida to pack his belongings and prepare for the move. He told Kelly he would be back in 2 weeks. While Justin was in Florida getting ready, on the night of Friday, April 13th, Kelly Bordeaux felt the urge to go out. After a long, exhausting week working at Fort Bragg, she decided to head back to Froggy Bottoms for a few drinks. She planned to go alone. Before leaving, she sent a selfie to her sister.
Right before she went out, she just said, "Hey, does this look okay?" and sent me a picture of her. And I was like, "Yeah, you look cute."
Tragically, that photo would become the very last image ever taken of Kelly. Throughout the night, Kelly continued texting Justin. Then, at 1:30 a.m., she sent him a final message. "I got home safe. I'm going to sleep now. I'm tired and drunk. Call me tomorrow." And that was truly the last time anyone ever heard from Kelly Bordeaux. When Justin read the message, something immediately felt off. Why would Kelly specifically say she got home safe, unless she hadn't actually made it home safely? He called her again and again throughout the weekend, but there was no response. Kelly's silence sent Justin into a state of growing panic fear, and dread.
It was so weird. She just like the text message before that was, "Hey, call me, call me, call me."
Eventually, he contacted Kelly's family. When Kelly failed to report for duty at Fort Bragg on Monday morning, and there was no sign of her at her apartment, both her family and the military became deeply concerned. Justin contacted the Fayetteville Police Department to report Kelly missing. Kelly's fellow soldiers, along with police officers, searched her apartment. That was when the truth became clear. Kelly had never returned home that night. Only then was Kelly Bordeaux officially classified as a missing person. Authorities notified her family immediately. They flew to North Carolina without delay, including her estranged husband, Mike Bordeaux. A massive search operation began, but it felt as though Kelly had simply vanished without a trace. Police quickly focused their investigation on those closest to Kelly, especially her estranged husband, Mike Bordeaux. Appearing on television, visibly distraught, he pleaded, "Please let her come home."
I just want her home, and I want her safe.
He described himself as a devoted husband and claimed that he had not seen Kelly for 10 days before her disappearance. Despite rumors that he had moved out, Mike denied any separation, insisting he had only gone to Florida to visit his father. "We're married, we're not divorced, we're together, we love each other," he said. However, he also admitted to investigators that their relationship was troubled and that Kelly appeared to want a divorce. Clearly, she had begun moving on something Mike did not take well. Mike quickly became the #1 suspect, even though he insisted that he was in Florida on the day Kelly disappeared. He provided police with a verified alibi, proving that he was at his home in St. Cloud, Florida, hundreds of miles away from Fayetteville, North Carolina, when his wife vanished. And as in many cases, suspicion also fell on the jealous partner. Justin Thompson, Kelly's boyfriend, soon found himself under police scrutiny as well. As the days passed, like in most missing person cases, the chances of finding Kelly alive grew smaller and smaller. At this point, both Justin and Mike had been confirmed to be in Florida when Kelly was last seen alive, so neither of them could be responsible. Then Justin told police a detail that caught their attention. 1 week before Kelly disappeared, when Justin was in Fayetteville, the two of them had gone to Froggy Bottoms and met a bartender there. They spent most of the night talking with him. The bartender's name was Nicholas Holbert. He sat drinking and chatting with them for a large portion of the evening, and Justin said he found him a little strange. Nicholas asked for Kelly's phone number, and not long after that, Justin and Kelly left. Justin then told police that on the night Kelly was last seen, when she went back to the bar alone, she accepted a ride from Nicholas. Witnesses confirmed that Kelly had been at the bar she was seen drinking, playing pool, and texting Justin, or possibly someone else was texting on her phone. Investigators decided to speak with Nicholas. What they discovered was troubling. Nicholas was living in extremely poor conditions, essentially camping out behind the bar, in the woods, sleeping in his vehicle, almost like a makeshift shelter. When police brought him in for formal questioning, he was fairly cooperative.
Since Friday night, no contact with her whatsoever. You don't know where she's at. Well, what do you know about her?
Nothing really for what, 6 hours altogether?
Down in the car, I need to know about that.
No, I did not.
Not even touched her.
No.
He even appeared on television saying, "I'm heartbroken too. She seemed like a good person."
Around 1:30, she told me, she's like, "I'm tired, I want to go home." I said, "Okay," so we got in the car, and as soon as I pulled into Meadowbrook, she said, "You can stop right here and let me out, I walk."
But the level of concern surrounding him only increased. Not only was Nicholas the last person known to have seen Kelly alive, he was also a registered sex offender, convicted in a case involving a 5-year-old victim, and had served 5 years in prison. Only 5 years. Despite being the top suspect, police still had no hard evidence. Nothing beyond the feeling that he looked like the kind of guy who could have done it. However, investigators discovered that Nicholas had failed to properly register an address as required for sex offenders, since he had no permanent residence. That gave police a reason to arrest him, hoping they could apply pressure and see if he would reveal something while in custody. They questioned him repeatedly. Still, nothing came out of it. Eventually, Nicholas stopped cooperating altogether. Day by day, week by week, the search for Kelly grew colder. A reward of $25,000 was offered, but it led nowhere. What police did not know was that someone else had been paying close attention to Kelly Bordeaux's disappearance ever since seeing it on television, a private investigator named David Marshburn. Month after month, spring turned to summer, and summer into fall. Long after everyone else had given up, David was still there alone, searching the forests of North Carolina for Kelly. No one knew. Not the police, not the family. When David saw Nicholas Holbert's interview on television, he knew Nicholas was lying.
I actually happened to see Nick Holbert on TV doing his interview on Kelly Bordeaux.
He believed Nicholas was involved in what had happened and suspected that once Nicholas was released from jail, he could get more information out of him than the police ever could. David Marshburn believed Kelly had been buried somewhere in the woods near Froggy Bottoms, but the forest was vast. He searched for months with an assistant and a dog. In the year 2013, Nicholas was released from jail. And who was waiting for him? David Marshburn. Nice to meet you. David contacted Nicholas on the very day he was released.
I had to be his best friend. I had to be a good friend to him. When he answered the door, I said, Nick, I'm David Marshburn. I'm a PI. I'd like to talk to you about Kelly. I don't believe you done it.
And asked for his help. I'm looking for her. I need your help. I don't think you did anything to her, but if you help me find her, it'll clear your name. Nicholas agreed. Over the next several months, a dream friendship began to form, at least on the surface. David hoped Nicholas would eventually confess. But Nicholas was not easy to crack. David applied constant pressure in subtle ways, giving him small jobs, handing him cash, buying him beer, buying him cigarettes, driving him wherever he needed to go. At one point, David even showed Nicholas a fake plea deal he had printed in his office, claiming that if Nicholas confessed to involuntary manslaughter, assuming he had been involved, he would only serve a few years in prison, light as a feather. And propris. I clated, rovid dated. The document was completely fake. It even included a judge's signature, Justin F., just in case. But Nicholas did not fall for it. Still, Nicholas's hesitation only strengthened David's belief that he knew where Kelly was buried. David kept playing the long game. In total, he spent more than $40,000 on Nicholas. He even paid to help Nicholas complete his probation, just to keep him from going back to prison where David would lose access to him entirely. In short, David did everything he could to become Nicholas's brother. Over time, the effort took a heavy toll on David. At one point, he even admitted that he had briefly considered torturing Nicholas to get the truth. It wasn't until exactly 2 years after Kelly Bordeaux disappeared that things finally began to surface. David tried a new tactic. He had one of his associates follow Nicholas in a very obvious way, so obvious that Nicholas became paranoid, believing police were watching him. Then David showed him a fake murder indictment. Nicholas panicked. After that, David presented the fake plea deal once again. This time it worked. Nicholas led David into the woods behind Froggy Bottoms. David brought in a trained search dog to the area Nicholas indicated. After 2 long years, police were finally called to the scene. Nicholas finally told the truth about what had happened.
Went and picked her up, went back to the bar, played pool, drank, done karaoke. Everything was going good. He said not he child molester or something like that. So I just snapped and zoned out and hit her. She was dead. I hit her, knocked her out, and I stuck her in the car and took her back to where I stayed at. And, I got scared. I didn't want nowhere to hear her, so I hit her again. And I pulled in here. I went, took her over there and buried her. I left and went back to the bar, stayed at the bar.
David noticed broken branches and overgrown brush that looked exactly like they had been disturbed 2 years earlier. He probed the ground and suddenly, the earth gave way. He called in the dog. The dog alerted. David began digging.
We dig down, and it's still flat.
And what he found is what you are seeing now.
You not only killed her, but you raped her. You're a sick, and you need to be put away forever.
Nicholas Holbert was arrested and later pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. At Holbert's trial, Kelly's family was especially outraged by what he had done to her. Kelly's brother Matt became so angry that the judge ordered him removed from the courtroom. Outside, Matt spoke honestly with local television reporters.
Honestly, what I thought would happen is I would just assault him, so it was a good thing that the judge kicked me out.
Holbert attempted to apologize to Kelly's family.
You and your family probably didn't want to hear anything I had to say.
Kelly's mother, overwhelmed with grief and anger, said in court,
Mr. Holbert, could you look at me for a minute? I don't understand. How you could take a beautiful young girl for pretty much no reason and beat the life right out of her.
Facing the death penalty, Nicholas Holbert pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. All of this was made possible by David Marshburn, a relentless private investigator who single-handedly brought Holbert to justice and solved the mystery of Kelly Bordeaux, while the Fayetteville police had reached a dead end. Marshburn admitted that there were moments when he nearly gave up, but he said he felt a moral obligation to continue for Kelly and for her family.
Every day I was exhausted having to go search for this girl. I was muddy, I was cut, I got sick, I was just fed up with it, I was tired of his games.
This case is truly unusual because it required someone willing to operate outside the lines, using techniques law enforcement could not use, becoming Nicholas's friend for months, applying constant psychological pressure, deceiving him until he finally confessed to the truth. This case reminds us that justice does not always arrive quickly, and sometimes it does not arrive through official channels alone. When systems stalled and hope faded, one man refused to look away. David Marshburn walked into darkness armed with patience, empathy, and relentless resolve. He endured months of frustration, personal sacrifice, and moral strain, choosing persistence over comfort. Because he stayed, a lost soldier was finally found, a family received answers, and a killer faced truth. Kelly Bordeaux mattered, and because one investigator cared enough to keep going, her story did not end in silence. It honors courage always. The parking lot was nearly empty when the first employee arrived. It was still dark, the kind of hour when the day has not fully begun and the night has not completely let go. A black Nissan sat in one of the spaces, engine cold, lights off. It did not stand out. It did not demand attention. It looked like any other car left behind by someone who planned to come back later, but no one did. When police would later reconstruct what happened, they would focus on distance. This parking lot was almost an hour away from where Diana Duvet lived. An hour away from her routines. An hour away from the places where people would instinctively look for her. Inside the car, nothing appeared immediately wrong. The doors were locked, the windows intact. There was no sign of a struggle in plain view. And yet, this vehicle had not arrived here by accident.
Her name is Diana Duvet.
Diana was 26 years old, a nurse, someone whose days were spent caring for people at their most vulnerable. The last time her mother heard from her was in the early hours of the morning. A short message, written in Russian. It said only that she would not be coming home. After that, there was silence.
I didn't wait for her that night. When I got up in the morning, there is text message there. Mom, I'm not coming home tonight. I texted her, Diana, where you at? Call me.
By the time her mother walked into the police station to report her missing, something else had already begun to trouble investigators. Diana was gone.
She's my everything. I need her back. Just come home. Everybody love you. Everybody misses you terribly.
All I cared about, find her. Where is my daughter? Where is Diana?
You can see the sheer fear and panic in Lena's eyes. I said, Lena, I promise you, I'm gonna get your daughter back for you one way or another.
Before her name became part of an investigation, Diana Duvet lived a life defined by routine and responsibility.
She's highly intelligent, always motivated.
She was 26 years old and worked as a nurse, specializing in oncology.
She really, really cared about her patients, about patients' families.
But people close to her said she was deeply committed to it. She showed up, she stayed late, she cared. Diana had not grown up in the place she would eventually call home. She was born in Moldova and moved to Florida as a teenager after her mother remarried.
A girl that didn't speak English at all. Within 2 months, she was in a regular school class. In a few years, you couldn't even guess that she's not American.
By the time she graduated college with her nursing degree, she was fully integrated into the life she had built. Friends described her as social and warm, someone who made connections easily. She had a wide circle, moved comfortably between different groups of people, and rarely struggled to be liked. To those around her, she appeared independent and capable, the kind of person who could manage both her career and her personal life without much drama. It was through the local bar scene that Diana met Michael Jones. Michael was older, in his early 30s, and carried himself with confidence. He had a law degree and worked in wealth management, overseeing large sums of money for clients.
Mike told me that he was a trust attorney for PNC Wealth Management.
He handled a lot of multi-million-dollar accounts. A lot of people trusted him with a lot of money.
I first met Mike Jones at a networking luncheon. He was a charming guy.
Colleagues viewed him as competent and professional. On the surface, there was little reason to question him.
He was extremely polite, nice dressed, well-spoken.
Seemed like the ideal boyfriend.
The relationship moved quickly. Within months, Diana and Michael were living together in his apartment in Vero Beach. To outsiders, it looked like a stable step forward.
She seemed happy, so we were okay with it.
But among friends, there were subtle observations that did not fully align with that image. Some noticed that Michael seemed more invested than Diana, that he pursued her persistently in the early stages, that winning her over had taken effort. These details did not register as warning signs at the time. By the spring of 2014, their shared life appeared settled. Diana was working full-time. Michael was established in his career. They lived together, socialized together, and moved through public spaces as a couple. And yet, beneath that surface, the balance was not as even as it appeared. Those closest to Diana would later reflect on how little they truly knew about what happened behind closed doors.
There was a time where we were getting lunch. I remember she wanted to go somewhere where Mike wasn't going to see her or run into her or see her car. It was almost as if she would have been in trouble getting lunch with me.
Friends would later describe Michael Jones as jealous and controlling, though those words only gained weight after everything else had happened. At the time, his behavior was often dismissed as intensity. One evening, weeks before Diana disappeared, that intensity became visible to others. At a local bar called The Grove, Diana spoke briefly with another man. It was casual, a short conversation, nothing more than the kind of interaction that happens in crowded places. But Michael noticed, and his reaction was immediate. Witnesses recalled the shift in his demeanor, his posture, his tone, the way he confronted the man, not with curiosity, but with hostility. It was unnecessary, overblown. The situation was diffused by others before it escalated further, but the impression lingered. This was not someone who handled perceived threats calmly. Days later, Diana and Michael walked into a restaurant called Scampy Grill for dinner. The staff recognized them, not because they were regulars, but because of the earlier encounter at the bar. From the moment they sat down, something felt wrong.
I went up to the table to introduce myself. They seemed a little on edge.
Did you know him at that time?
No, we had seen him. Actually, one of the employees here, Kevin, and I had encountered him Friday night.
When you say him, who are you talking about?
Michael.
Okay. You're talking about Michael Jones?
Yes, sir. Okay. We were at the Grove having a couple beverages after work, and Kevin made contact with the girlfriend at the time, and just casual conversation, and he came up with attitude and stuff, and we were already a few drinks into the night, and we're like, this is garbage, so we're on a long day, let's just leave it at that and go home. So we did. We left it at that and went home. So when they came in Wednesday night, Kevin was working with me, and he goes, "That guy look familiar to you?" I'm like, "Yeah, he does." He goes, "That's the guy from the Grove that tried to get into it with me." You could visibly see that something was going on with her. The demeanor didn't change at all. And I looked through service window at the table every so often just to check on them, and you could see that there was agitation between the two of them. I was talking to Kevin about it too. I'm like, "Dude, that is not a happy table." I'm like, "There's a lot of agitation going on." And he noticed it too.
Would you say that he's aggressive with her?
Oh, the way he was talking to her? Absolutely. His body motion was absolutely aggressive.
They left the restaurant together that night. About an hour later, Michael returned to the Grove alone. A friend who saw him there noticed that he was emotional, crying, distraught in a way that felt out of place in a public bar. It was the kind of behavior that suggested something had gone seriously wrong, that a private moment had spilled into the open. By later accounts,
I saw Mike Jones on Wednesday
and he was sitting by himself. He was texting on his phone, and then he left shortly thereafter. But I just thought it was really bizarre behavior for him to be so upset in public. I got the impression that he'd been given like some really bad news.
The dinner at Scampy Grill marked a turning point, a breakup, a decision made quietly, without witnesses, but heavy enough to leave visible cracks. What no one knew then was whether that ending had truly been accepted by both people involved. From the outside, it looked like the relationship was unraveling. From the inside, something far more unstable may have already taken hold. The tension that surfaced in public had already existed behind closed doors. Months earlier, the relationship between Diana and Michael had fractured in a way few people initially understood. In April, a heated argument inside their home escalated beyond raised voices. Michael yelled. He made threats. The situation became serious enough that a neighbor, hearing the disturbance, called 911.
It's been going on for about an hour.
Just been yelling and screaming, or?
Yeah, it just sounds like he's trying to dominate the crap out of her.
So it's just been verbal, right?
Verbal, I can't hear any slaps or anything, but I'll tell you, it's not good.
Diana did not stay silent that night. She reached out to her closest friend, Chelsea, hysterical and frightened.
She called me in tears, leaving his apartment. I told her to just come straight to where I was, and she did. And she was still in her pajamas, hysterical. She was explaining that he was screaming at her, that it had been going on for what felt like hours, and he just wasn't letting up. And if he finally got to the point where he had put his hands around her neck and started strangling her, I could clearly see that there were marks on her neck.
Evidence that the argument had crossed into physical violence. Photos were taken. The incident was documented.
I need to document this. I need to protect her. She just wanted to move her things out and remove herself from the situation, and that's what we did.
Diana moved back in with her parents and did not tell them that Jones had tried to strangle her.
I think she was just trying to protect me, so I wouldn't worry. And she thought that she handled it. In her mind, it was over.
For a period, they stopped speaking, but time passed. Distance softened urgency, and slowly, contact resumed. Friends would later say that when Diana and Michael got back together, things seemed calmer, normal, as if the earlier violence had been an exception rather than a warning. Not everyone was convinced. Another friend, Kyle, described Michael as controlling and quick to anger. He said he tried to warn Diana, sensing something in Michael that felt unstable. His concern was not abstract. He had experienced it himself. At a bar, Kyle greeted Diana with a brief hug. Nothing more. Michael saw it. And once again, his reaction was immediate. He confronted Kyle, fists clenched, moving toward him with clear aggression. Kyle later gave the following statement to investigators.
And he pursued again with aggression, more aggression, to try to fight me.
What exactly say to you, Kyle?
Didn't really say nothing, just stared at me and started walking towards me like with anger.
Did he have his fists?
Yes, fists were clenched. He was ready to fight. Out of rage and jealousy, not much. I believe, it was a while back, but I believe he said, "Get that fuck off her," and it was a simple hug as a friend.
Okay, would you say he's got some jealousy issues?
Yes.
Yet even with these warning signs, life continued. Diana went to work. She socialized. She made plans. From the outside, there was no visible crisis unfolding in real time. What existed instead was something more dangerous, a history that had not been resolved, a cycle that had not been broken. And as June approached its final weeks, the consequences of that cycle were about to surface. On the night everything shifted, there was no public argument, no raised voices that drew attention, just a sequence of ordinary moments that would later carry unbearable weight.
Diana was out with some friends. They described her as enjoying herself, but she was texting a lot. They just felt like it was a little out of the ordinary.
Diana and Michael went out together again. Despite what had happened days earlier, despite the tension and the apparent breakup,
she left her friends and then went and met up with Mike Jones at another establishment. It's called What a Tavern. They appeared to be having a good time, as in having quite a few drinks. At one point, it appeared as though she was crying and visibly upset, but then kind of not. And when they were leaving, the bar staff said, "Are you guys okay to get home?" It was around 1:30 a.m. Mike said, "I'm going to drive her home, don't worry about it."
Michael paid the tab with his credit card. They left. It was the last confirmed sighting of Diana Duvet while she was alive. She walked out of the bar and got into her car with the man she had recently tried to leave behind. Sometime after that, Diana sent a message to her mother. It was brief, written in Russian, the language she used when speaking to her family.
I didn't wait for her that night. When I got up in the morning, there is text message there. "Mom, I'm not coming home tonight." I texted her, "Diana, where you at? Call me."
Diana did not show up for work. Calls went unanswered. Her phone stayed silent. As concern spread, attention turned to the place where she had last been known to stay, the apartment she shared with Michael.
We want to find Diana. We want to reunite her with her parents. We want to make sure she's okay. Officers responded, knocked on the door, made contact with both Diana and Mike Jones.
We did get a search warrant that day to get into Michael Jones's apartment to try to collect physical evidence or find Diana, and hopefully it'd be, next to nothing.
When police entered the residence, it felt strangely untouched. No sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture.
We didn't find a lot. We didn't find any belongings that we felt were Diana's. We didn't find any sign of her.
But both cars were gone. And in the garage, near the base of the door, investigators noticed small droplets on the floor. They appeared dark, irregular, out of place. Michael was gone as well. The man who had told Diana's mother that she was sleeping at his house stopped answering his phone.
We're in a million different directions trying to find her and him. His phone has been turned off. Her phone is now turned off.
Once the missing person report was filed, the search for Diana shifted quickly from concern to urgency. Detectives began by tracing the last known movements of both Diana and Michael. The apartment offered little in the way of immediate answers. It was quiet, orderly, almost deliberately so. But the absence of both vehicles raised questions that could not be ignored. Alerts were sent out across the state. Not long after, Michael's gold Mazda was located in the parking lot of a Hampton Inn in Fort Pierce. It was an unexpected find. Surveillance footage showed him checking in alone. He paid in cash. He instructed staff not to put any calls through and not to tell anyone he was there. Another call came in. Diana's black Nissan had been found in the parking lot of a public supermarket in Melbourne, nearly an hour from her home. When officers opened the trunk, the search ended. Diana's body was inside. She was dressed only in her underwear. The medical examiner would later determine that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and had been strangled. She had likely been dead for days. Investigators now focused on how the car arrived there and how the person who left it managed to leave.
And I opened the door, and here's Chief Police in complete uniform.
The saddest thing in my life was seeing him come out the driveway.
And he told me they found her. They found her. To lose her like this, it's indescribable.
Putting my head down, it was not the way I wanted to find her.
Anybody that got a chance to meet Diana knows that she just brought a smile to their face and was a bright spot in their life. You get to know who people are, and she's one of those people that you won't find anybody that has anything bad to say about her. You could see from the outreach from the community that just speaks volumes of who she was. It's a devastating loss.
A Publix employee reported seeing the Nissan pull into the lot just before dawn. She could not identify the driver.
So I said, well, I seen when the cars pulled up, I was sitting in my car. Okay. And the bakery manager, she said, what, you seen the cars pull up? Which day? And I was like, so it was either Saturday or Friday. It was like 4:45 in the morning, because I get here like 4:45 and I sit in my car.
Did you see who was driving the black vehicle?
No.
That uncertainty led detectives to a different conclusion. Whoever abandoned the car needed transportation away from the scene. Local taxi companies were contacted.
So we just started cold calling some of these taxi agencies. And I said, hey, did you get a fare to Vero in the last couple of days? And man, we hit one. And I was like, wow, that's just that doesn't happen every day. So we got lucky on that one.
One report stood out. A driver from Black Diamond Taxi.
I showed up and there was a guy outside with a red hoodie on. And he got in the passenger side of the vehicle.
During the drive, the passenger explained that he had come down with a friend.
I asked him questions like, what brought you down here? And he said, oh, well, I came here with a friend of mine, And so then I asked him, I said, how come you didn't get a ride back with your friend to Vero Beach? And he said, well, they got into an argument and she's very pissed with him.
The taxi dropped him off in Vero Beach, directly across from the apartment Diana had shared with Michael. When shown a photo lineup, the driver identified Michael Jones. Further evidence followed. Investigators discovered that Michael had purchased a burner phone early that same morning at a Walmart in Palm Bay. Surveillance cameras captured him arriving alone in Diana's Nissan.
It's a little grainy, but it appeared to be Diana's car.
Entering the store, buying the phone, and leaving. Diana was not seen with him. The timeline narrowed, the movements aligned. The silence from Michael took on a different meaning. What had once looked like disappearance now looked deliberate, and the pieces, placed carefully side by side, were no longer pointing in multiple directions. They were pointing to one person. Michael Jones was formally charged with first-degree murder within days of the discovery of Diana's body. He was held without bond. From the moment of his arrest, he refused to speak further with investigators.
He didn't show any emotion. He didn't ask any more questions. He just sat there.
You there, Mike?
Yeah, I request my right to counsel. Turn and right to remain silent.
Okay.
We have nothing else to say to you.
I want to point out to you, the first time we talked to you, we were there to talk to you about a missing person. Okay? Now we're here to talk to you about the murder. Okay? That being said, I'm going to go ahead and read your Miranda rights. You understand?
Yes.
Okay.
Using my right to silence and unequivocally requesting my right to counsel. So you don't want to talk to us? I request my right to counsel. Okay. That's all you have to say to us.
As the case moved forward, more of Michael's past came into focus. Former partners described patterns of control, jealousy, and emotional manipulation. Records revealed a prior felony conviction for aggravated stalking involving another ex-girlfriend.
911, what is your emergency?
This is the 911 emergency call made by Michael's ex-girlfriend asking for help.
My ex-boyfriend just called me and told me that he has packed his gun, and that as soon as I walk outside, the gunshot will go off in my head. What happened? My ex-boyfriend threatened to kill himself tonight, and then when I told him that we were not getting back together, he told me he would kill me. I'm very afraid. I've seen him angry before.
Details that once seemed disconnected now formed a consistent picture. Michael entered a plea of not guilty. When the trial began years later, the courtroom became the final place where Diana's life and death would be examined in full. Prosecutors laid out a timeline built on movement, surveillance footage, witness testimony, and forensic evidence. They argued that Diana had been killed intentionally, then transported, concealed, and abandoned. The sequence, they said, was not the result of panic, but of choice. The defense offered a different explanation. They claimed the evidence was circumstantial. They suggested that Diana's injuries could have been accidental, that she might have been alive when placed in the trunk, and that Michael's actions afterward were driven by fear rather than intent. A medical expert testified that the blunt force injury alone could have caused death. Under cross-examination, even that expert conceded a critical point. Diana's death was best classified as a homicide. Michael Jones chose not to testify. Whatever explanation he might have offered was never spoken aloud. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. In the sentencing phase, prosecutors sought the death penalty. Diana's mother addressed the court.
I still can't talk about Diana, just too painful. But I know I have to do it so you, the 12 people in the jury, would know what I and my family lost. She was only 26 years old and had such a wonderful plans for her young life. These unfulfilled plans will haunt me for the rest of my days.
When the jury voted, 11 jurors supported a sentence of death, one did not. Under Florida law, unanimity was required. Because that unanimity was not reached, the death penalty could not be imposed.
The jury unanimously find that the defendant, Michael Jones, should be sentenced to death. No.
You came to my home, you sit at my table, and you took my daughter away from me. There is no punishment, no harsh enough for what you took from me. You know, if he could kill, he would be dead, not now. for what you do.
In November 2019, Michael David Jones was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The legal process ended there. The damage did not. When the courtroom emptied and the sentence was finalized, the case did not truly end for those who had known Diana. Her mother spoke of a future that would never arrive.
I'll never go to my daughter's wedding. I will never hug her again. And nobody will ever call me mom again. I will never see her in her wedding dress. And I will never have grandchildren I hoped for.
No ordinary milestones that marked the passing of time. What remained instead was absence, measured not in years, but in moments that would never happen. For the people who had worked alongside Diana, the loss was quieter, but no less permanent.
Anybody that got a chance to meet Diana knows that she just brought a smile to their face and was a bright spot in their life. She was never anybody to shy away from the things that we wanted to do over there, and she was just a gamer and an awesome person all around. You get to know who people are, and she's one of those people that you won't find anybody that has anything bad to say about her.
A nurse who did not return to her shift, a familiar presence missing from hallways and break rooms, a reminder that violence does not always announce itself loudly before it strikes. Michael Jones would spend the rest of his life in prison, stripped of the career, the image, and the control he once worked to maintain.
He's still gonna die in jail, one way or another, and he's never gonna hurt another girl again.
This is my home! Yay!
This is Brooke Wilberger, a young, vibrant freshman with her whole life ahead of her. She was energetic, optimistic, and full of purpose. On May 24th, 2004, what began as an ordinary morning quietly turned into the beginning of a nightmare. That morning, Brooke stepped outside her apartment complex to clean the outdoor light posts. She set her flip-flops beside a bucket of soapy water and got to work. Then, without warning, she vanished. There were no witnesses, no clear signs of what had happened. Only a disturbing silence that settled over what had always been a peaceful residential community. When police arrived, it didn't take long for them to understand one thing clearly. Brooke had not left on her own. There had been a faint scream. A strange vehicle reported nearby.
We don't have a suspect. We don't have any clear leads.
We just wanted her back. We just wanted her still. I think that it was important to us to have her, just to get her back.
We felt very much an integral part of the case. Any tip that came in, they immediately let us know.
And slowly, an entire community began to sink into fear. What happened to Brooke Wilberger? And who turned that quiet morning into the start of a nightmare that would last for years? Let's take a closer look at the life of this young woman. Brooke Wilberger was 19 years old, living in Oregon. She was an excellent student and showed great promise in athletics. She loved basketball, snowboarding, and running. As a child, Brooke struggled with speech and did not begin talking until she was 4 years old. Her family never forgot that, not because it defined her, but because of everything that came after. Brooke grew into someone quietly determined, soft-spoken, but never passive. Someone who observed carefully. Someone who spoke up when something didn't feel right. She was the fifth of 6 children, raised in a large, close-knit family. She pushed herself both physically and academically, drawn to challenges that required discipline and focus. When it came time for college, Brooke chose Brigham Young University in Utah. Part of that decision was practical. BYU offered one of the strongest speech pathology programs in the country. Brooke wanted to help others overcome the same struggles she once faced. She wanted to give people confidence in their own voices. Her first year of college went smoothly. She adapted. She found her rhythm. And like many students, when summer arrived, she returned home to find work and gain a little independence before the next semester. Her sister, Stephanie, helped Brooke secure a summer job at Oak Park Apartments in Corvallis, about 30 miles from their parents' home. Stephanie lived there and managed the complex with her husband. It was an ideal arrangement, a light summer job that allowed Brooke to earn money while maintaining an active social life. Brooke planned to stay with Stephanie for a few days at a time while working, then spend time with friends and family. May 24th, 2004. It was the beginning of the work week, a warm Monday morning in Corvallis, Oregon. Stephanie and Brooke had plans to have lunch together that afternoon, between Brooke's work shifts. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, Stephanie looked out the window and saw Brooke filling a bucket with water, preparing to clean the outdoor lights. A few hours later, while Stephanie was preparing lunch for her children and her sister, she noticed the time. It was past 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Brooke was late. Stephanie later said she called to her kids jokingly, "All right, let's form a search team." She walked through the apartment buildings, assuming Brooke might be chatting with a resident or had lost track of time that made her uneasy. The bucket Brooke had prepared along with the cleaning supplies was still sitting beside a lamppost. When Stephanie stepped closer, she noticed Brooke's flip-flops were there too. The straps between the toes were torn, the soles were smeared with mud. Stephanie said it looked as though Brooke had been pulled out of them while trying to stand her ground. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, we're trying to find a missing person. Last seen. Around 10:30. From the moment officers arrived, they sensed this was not a typical missing person case. Adults can disappear for many reasons. Most cases begin with waiting hours, sometimes an entire day, but the details at Oak Park Apartments did not allow for that patience. Lieutenant Ron Noble later explained.
911, what's your emergency? Yeah, I've got someone who's missing, a worker friend that we can't seem to find. From where? I'm the manager of the Oak Park Apartments, and this worker actually happens to be my sister-in-law. She's 19. When was the last time anybody saw her? Around 10:30.
Someone who had changed her mind and walked away. Police began canvassing the entire complex. Officers went door to door, repeatedly asking the same questions. Had anyone seen Brooke? Had anyone noticed anything unusual? Had anyone heard anything? A few residents mentioned a scream. At a time anyone questioned it, Brooke was already gone. As word spread, the atmosphere shifted. Neighbors grew uneasy. Parents watched their children more closely. Students changed their routines. A once quiet apartment complex became a place filled with unanswered questions. Investigators widened their focus. They reviewed known offenders in the area, hundreds of names. Each one had to be checked. Time-consuming, inexact, but necessary. They also looked beyond Oak Park. Reports began surfacing of a dark-colored minivan seen near Oregon State University around the time Brooke disappeared. A vehicle approaching young women. A driver asking questions. Incidents that might have seemed harmless on their own, but together formed a pattern no one had recognized soon enough. Search efforts expanded. Volunteers joined law enforcement. Flyers appeared everywhere. Tips poured in. Some led nowhere. Others sparked hope, only to collapse under scrutiny. Days passed, then weeks. And with each passing moment, one truth became harder to avoid. What happened to Brooke Wilberger was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding, and it was not something that would resolve itself with time. As days turned into weeks, the search entered a new reality.
The investigation had kind of gotten to a point where they were still plugging away, following up on tips, still talking to people, still turning over rocks, still searching, and we were at that point just hoping for something to break.
Volunteers remained. Flyers stayed up. Calls continued to come in from across Oregon and beyond. People reported sightings. People hoped they were helping. Every lead had to be checked, especially when it led nowhere. Investigators pursued every possible lead. The
investigation had kind of gotten to a point where they were still plugging away, following up on tips, still talking to people, still turning over rocks, still searching, and we were at that point just hoping for something to break.
Interviewed residents, expanded the search area, carefully reviewed reports of a dark green minivan seen near the university. They tracked a man who had drawn attention for unrelated but disturbing criminal behavior, searched his home, reviewed his movements, and looked for anything that might explain what had happened that morning. But nothing connected him to Brooke. One by one, the early theories collapsed. The man was ruled out. Reported sightings could not be confirmed. The search widened, then narrowed, then widened again. Each passing day brought less certainty than the one before. A month went by. For Brooke's family,
when you start making steps to entering other buildings and dormitories and going and stealing other people's property, being in the underwear, that's a progression, and ultimately abducting somebody.
Time was measured differently. Mornings arrived without answers. Nights ended without resolution. Her absence settled in, heavy and immovable. Statistically, investigators knew what prolonged disappearances often meant. Quietly, they began preparing for conclusions no one wanted to say out loud. But there was still no body, No crime scene beyond the apartment complex. No direct evidence explaining what had happened after Brooke stepped away from the lamppost. A few days later, investigators received a tip about a man named Sun-Koo Kim, and he quickly became a person of interest. Kim was a 30-year-old recluse with degrees in genetics and cell biology. He lived...
It's more than just a checklist. Either someone is planning a very heinous mutilation, sexual assault crime, and murder, or it's a fantasy. But either way, it's extremely important to us in our investigation and very startling.
Lived with his parents in this house, about 80 miles from Corvallis, in a suburb of Portland. In the weeks before Brooke disappeared, he had spent most of his time online trading stocks. Kim came under scrutiny after he was caught stealing women's underwear.
Public knows he's not related to disappeared girl. Everybody knows.
From multiple college dormitories and charged with burglary. One of those dorms was located at Oregon State University, just a short distance from the Oak Park apartments. A search of Kim's home uncovered thousands of pairs of women's underwear. Investigators believe that behavior like this could easily escalate. Just before sunrise, nearly a week after Brooke vanished, police raided Kim's home. On his computer, they found 40,000 pornographic images and 4,000 videos, many depicting rape, torture, and dismemberment. They also discovered a file labeled osu.doc, short for Oregon State University. The file had been created after Brooke disappeared and was deeply disturbing. It functioned as a guide on how to commit a sexually motivated crime and evade capture, including what to wear and what to bring. However, nothing directly linked Kim to Brooke. Despite how alarming the evidence was, Kim was ultimately ruled out when computer data, phone records, and receipts showed he had been at home and shopping with his father at the time Brooke disappeared. Kim later served 7 years in prison for multiple unrelated offenses, including burglary. His parents also filed a lawsuit against authorities over the way police raided their home that morning, claiming the action was excessive and traumatic. The case was settled for more than $300,000. In Brooke's case, days turned into weeks, and soon nearly a month had passed with no answers. And with each passing day, statistically, the likelihood of finding Brooke alive continued to decline. Investigators still had one lingering lead: a vehicle. Police were searching for information about a dark green minivan, possibly a 1997 model. They also asked a man named Brian to come forward, after he had previously called 911 to report that same vehicle driving dangerously. Detectives received multiple reports of a similar minivan circling the Oregon State University area on the very day Brooke disappeared. A university employee named Bob reported seeing a
Yeah, we're sitting at the light, and the girl comes running across the street, and my daughter in the front seat says that she doesn't have any clothes on. I told her, get in the car, lock the door, that I wouldn't let anybody hurt her, and no one helped her. Because we pulled around there, my daughter got out of the car and met her at the door and brought her over to the car. That's when she said, he's got a knife, he's trying to kill me.
Van with Minnesota license plates in a parking lot. He observed the driver speaking with a female student, who later appeared frightened enough to report the encounter to university staff. Another female student said the van had stopped directly in front of her, and the man inside asked for directions. She immediately walked away when she saw him step out of the vehicle and open the rear door. These were promising leads, but there was still a long road ahead to identifying the man behind the wheel and determining whether he was truly connected to Brooke's disappearance. Then, 6 agonizing months passed with no progress. Search teams slowly disbanded. Life, for most people, moved on. Then, far from Oregon, something else happened. In the final...
She described the car seats down to the details. She described the tinted windows. She described the fact the car was two-door, that it was red.
Week of November 2004, nearly 1,400 miles away, in the state of New Mexico, the break investigators had been praying for finally came. In Albuquerque, a waitress named Dara Finks,
It was gutsy as hell. And I think she's the hero. Dara is the hero of that night.
Was driving her SUV down the street with her 3 daughters just after dusk when they saw a young woman. What happened next came from Dara's own account. She said the young woman was clearly in distress, frantically trying to get help from someone inside a restaurant across the street. Dara...
He spoke Spanish.
She had been abducted but had managed to escape. She was blonde, blue-eyed, and on her neck
I called out to him as Joe. I said, Joe. And he acknowledged me. And as he got closer, "This your vehicle?" He said, "Yes." I had him turn around and I placed him in custody. I found a glass pipe used to smoke crack cocaine and a small knife.
The wound, she said, had been left by her kidnapper's knife. Inside the vehicle, she had been sexually assaulted. Then her abductor stopped at a nearby apartment complex, tied her up using her own shoelaces, and went inside. Incredibly, the woman managed to free herself. She left the shoelaces behind in the parking lot and ran into the street with no clothes on, where Dara Finks rescued her. But while the victim was now safe, her attacker was still at large. The young woman provided police with an astonishingly detailed description of the man and of his vehicle. She also remembered one small but critical detail: a small red stuffed animal hanging in the side window of the car. At that point, Albuquerque police officer Ed Taylor was among those searching for the suspect, a white male with a shaved head, wearing a baseball cap. Police also gathered information from a woman living in the apartment complex where the victim had escaped. She said the man's name was Joe, and that he spoke Spanish. Based on those details, police located the vehicle within hours. Inside, it was Joel Patrick Courtney. He was arrested just a few blocks from where the victim had escaped. He was already known to law enforcement, a convicted sex offender with a history of violence, a pattern that stretched across years.
We knew that if we were going to prove that Joel Courtney was responsible for this, the best chance we had was to find evidence of Brooke being in the van.
And across state lines. Joel Courtney was 38 years old. He lived in the Albuquerque suburb of Rio Rancho, in this home with his wife and 3 young children. He had worked as a mechanic and a fisherman, and had lived all over the United States, fluent in
They told me that you're not going to believe what we found. And I said, well, what is that? They said, we found Joel Courtney's DNA in the van. And I said, well, that's good, but that doesn't quite get us there. And they said, we also found Brooke Wilberger's DNA in the carpet in the van.
As an ever-smiling, attentive father had a dark side. 6 months earlier, his wife...
It was the nature of the DNA evidence which told an even bigger story. The DNA evidence was in the form of bodily fluids which were commingled. That told us a story in terms of what had occurred in that van.
Had taken out a restraining order against him, reporting that he had choked her. As detectives in New Mexico built their case, one investigator began to notice something else: the similarities to an unresolved disappearance in Oregon. A 19-year-old college student, taken in broad daylight, no witnesses, no body. A dark-colored minivan reported near the scene. When Oregon authorities were contacted, the overlap became impossible to ignore.
Have no respect for this court. You're the rudest person I've ever met.
I do believe, sir, that you are again attempting to delay this matter, as you had repeatedly.
I would spit in your face if I was close enough.
We now know police believe Brooke was murdered, and police believe a man currently sitting in an Albuquerque jail was the one who killed her.
Records showed that Courtney had been in Oregon at the time Brooke Wilberger disappeared. His movements placed him near Corvallis that day, and the vehicle he was driving then matched what witnesses had described months earlier. The vehicle was seized. Forensic teams dismantled it piece by piece. Surfaces were swabbed. Fibers were collected. Everything was logged, tested, and then tested again. The process took months. For Brooke's family, the waiting was unbearable. Then the results came back. Brooke's DNA was found inside the vehicle. Her hair was discovered among Courtney's belongings. The evidence confirmed what investigators had feared but could not prove for nearly a year. Brooke Wilberger had not disappeared on her own. She had been abducted, and the man responsible was already behind bars. In the summer of 2005, a grand jury in Oregon returned a sweeping indictment. Courtney was charged with multiple offenses, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, rape, and sexual abuse. The state announced its intent to seek the death penalty, but there was still one thing no indictment could provide. Brooke's body had not been found, and until that happened, the truth remained incomplete. Joel Patrick Courtney was already behind bars when Oregon began preparing its case. In New Mexico, he faced charges related to the abduction and sexual assault of the woman who survived. He ultimately pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. From his cell, Courtney denied any involvement in Brooke Wilberger's disappearance. He claimed he had never met her, that he had never even heard her name. In Oregon, prosecutors moved forward regardless. In 2005, a grand jury indicted Courtney on 19 counts, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, rape, sexual abuse, and sodomy. Under Oregon law, aggravated murder carried the possibility of the death penalty, but extradition could not happen immediately. Courtney first had to serve his sentence in New Mexico. Years passed. In January of 2007, Courtney attempted to avoid trial altogether, claiming he was mentally incompetent. The court rejected the claim. He was found fit to stand trial. The case continued slowly, deliberately under intense public scrutiny. By 2010, 5 years had passed since Brooke vanished. Prosecutors faced a painful reality. Without Brooke's body, a trial would be long, uncertain, and devastating for her family. Courtney knew this, and he used it. From prison, he made it clear that he knew where Brooke's remains were hidden. He refused to say more unless the state agreed to his terms. No death penalty, and a guarantee that he could complete his existing sentence in New Mexico before being transferred to Oregon. After months of negotiation, the state agreed. Courtney changed his plea to guilty. In exchange,
not much has been disclosed in the Wilberger case about where the crime actually took place. Authorities say it happened in the woods in Benton County in Coastal Range. And for the people who live in that area, they say they can't believe something like this could have happened in their backyard.
He led investigators to Brooke Wilberger. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no release, no second chance, no future beyond prison walls. But justice in this case came at a cost. It came years too late, and it came only after a man who had taken a life decided the truth was useful to him. More than 5 years after Brooke Wilberger disappeared, the search finally ended. Guided by Joel Patrick Courtney, investigators traveled west of Corvallis to a wooded area in Benton County, about 12 miles from where Brooke had been abducted. Her remains were found on private property, concealed beneath a fallen tree. Time and exposure had taken much, but not everything. Dental records confirmed her identity, and so did a small detail her mother recognized immediately. The silver watch Brooke had received as a Christmas gift was still with her. For Brooke's family, the discovery brought an ending they had waited years for, but not the one they had hoped for. There was no relief, no sense of closure, only the knowledge that she had been found, and that she could finally be brought home. In court, Courtney admitted what he had done. He acknowledged that on the day Brooke vanished, he had been driving through the area looking for a young woman. As investigators replayed the footage, the air in the room seemed to tighten. This was the last known video of Sally Ann Bowman. Security cameras inside a local bar had captured her final moments. She was dancing freely, relaxed, smiling, enjoying the evening with her sister and friends. She was a young, beautiful woman, just 18 years old. A few hours later, when the night at the bar came to an end, she got into a car with her boyfriend and disappeared into the darkness. She would never be seen again. The investigation quickly became a brutal test of endurance. Detectives were forced to sift through thousands of leads, interview countless witnesses, and analyze every minute of surveillance footage, yet the answers continued to hide in silence. Every step forward came at a cost: time, pressure, and sleepless nights, as the truth always seemed just within reach, only to slip away again. What happened to Sally Ann Bowman? Let us take a closer look at one of London's most shocking criminal cases. Sally Ann Bowman was born in 1987 in Carshalton, South London.
When she was 18, she was an adult, and she was very streetwise, so, even if I had them, there probably wouldn't have been many concerns.
She was the youngest daughter in a close-knit family. Those who knew her described her as warm, friendly, and emotionally mature beyond her years. She laughed easily. She spoke openly. She had a way of making people feel comfortable, even when meeting them for the first time. At home, she was deeply connected to her mother and sisters. Even after moving out, she never stayed away for long. Family was not something she drifted from. It was something she returned to, again and again. Sally moved into a rented room in South Croydon while she was still a teenager. It was a big step, but one she wanted. She was determined to support herself and build a future on her own terms. She worked hard, took opportunities when they came, and believed momentum mattered. To her, life felt like it was opening up, not closing in. Creativity was at the center of who she was. Performing was not a casual hobby. It was a passion she pursued seriously. Sally had been accepted into the Brit School for Performing Arts, a prestigious and highly selective institution. Getting in was not easy, and she understood what it meant. It was recognition of her talent, a sign that the dreams she talked about were not unrealistic. Alongside her studies, she also worked as a model, saying yes to any opportunity she could. She wanted experience, she wanted movement, she wanted more. To those around her, Sally was full of energy, bright, bubbly, the kind of person whose presence could light up a room without effort. She loved going out with friends, dancing, laughing, talking late into the night. At the same time, she valued quiet moments at home, especially with her family. There was nothing extreme about her lifestyle, nothing reckless, just the rhythm of an 18-year-old balancing independence, ambition, and connection. The day before she was killed did not feel significant. She spent it at her mother's house, resting and relaxing.
Sally Ann had woken up and just laid about all day in her pink fluffy dressing gown, watching telly, munching on biscuits and crisps and God knows what. And then the phone went a couple of times. It was Sister Nicole asking if she'd like to go out for the evening, as it was Nicole's best friend's birthday. It was about 6:05 in the evening on the Saturday the 24th, and I went to the door. Sally just said, "Love you, Mum." I said, "Love you too." It was the last time I saw her.
A goodbye no one imagined they would need to remember. That night, she went where she had gone many times before. The town center, a familiar bar, familiar faces.
Sally Ann had gone out with one of her sisters and some other friends into Croydon. And Sally Ann had spent most of the evening up to the early hours in Croydon town centre.
I've seen the CCTV footage. She was at the bar, she was laughing, flicking her hair about, giggling, and according to Nicole, they had an absolute excellent night.
Nothing in those images suggested fear or danger. Nothing hinted at what was coming. As the night began to wind down, the energy inside the bar slowly faded. People drifted out in small groups, conversations slowing as exhaustion set in.
And at the end of the night, she went back home with Nicole.
Sally left with her sister and stepped back into central Croydon, the familiar streets offering nothing that felt out of place or unsafe. It was around this time that her attention shifted.
But in the meantime of the journey, she was having a conversation with Lewis on the phone and got it into her head that she really wanted to see Lewis. So she arranged to go get a cab from Nicole's back into Croydon, where Lewis then went and picked her up.
Shortly after 2:20 in the morning, Sally took a taxi back toward Croydon.
She was picked up by Lewis Sproston and he drove her back to Blenheim Crescent, which is where she lived.
Louis met her there in his car. What followed was not a brief encounter. Instead, the two remained together for hours, driving and talking through the early morning. Inside the car, the tone of the conversation shifted. What began as discussion turned into an argument. By now, the night had lost any sense of lightness or social ease. The streets were quiet. Most houses were dark. Any tension between them had nowhere to dissipate. It stayed contained inside the enclosed space of the car, carried forward mile by mile, minute by minute.
It was probably around about 4:15 that Lewis drives away from Blenheim Crescent, looks in his rearview mirror, and apart from the actual murderer, was the last person to see Sally Ann alive.
Sally walked toward home. Louis Sproston left. The street returned to silence. But later, investigators would return to this moment again and again. Sally was now alone, standing on a residential street just meters from where she lived. It was a place she knew well, a road she had returned to safely many times before. Nothing in the setting suggested danger. Nothing demanded alarm. And yet, something had changed. Just minutes after Sally stepped out of the car, a nearby resident was startled awake by a sound they could not immediately understand. A noise that tore through the early morning quiet and then stopped abruptly. At the time, there was no context to explain it. Only confusion, only uncertainty. What happened next would not become clear until much later. But in that brief window of time, between the car driving away and the street falling silent again, the course of the night shifted in a way no one could yet see. The street on Blenheim Crescent did not react. No lights turned on, no doors opened. No voices broke the early morning stillness. Whatever had disturbed the witness moments earlier faded quickly, leaving behind the sense that something had happened without being fully seen. Sally was no longer on the phone. She was no longer inside the car. She stood alone on a familiar residential road, only a short distance from the room she rented. On any other night, this would have been the final stretch, the part where the evening simply ended. Instead, time slipped forward without explanation. Later, the nearby witness described being awakened by a strange sound. This is how a detective would later recount it.
What we know from a witness is that about 4:15 that Sunday morning, the witness woke up because they heard what they described as a garbled sound, which ended in a scream. Now, they looked out of their window, which looked onto the location that Sally Ann was eventually discovered, but couldn't see anything. It was very still, there was no other noise. They left their window, but returned about 5 minutes later, hadn't switched their bedroom lights on or anything like that, and they looked out and they saw a man walk down the street in the direction of where Sally Ann was eventually found. They then didn't see or hear anything else and they went back to bed.
Inside the houses lining the street, people remained asleep. No one came outside. No one called out. When daylight arrived, the meaning of that silence became devastatingly clear.
It's about 6:30 on the Sunday morning when a neighbour saw what they described as a pair of mannequin legs sticking out from behind a builder's skip. They went over to have a look and discovered the body of Sally Ann, partially clothed and clearly dead at that point in time.
The scene told police immediately that this was not an accident, and not something that could be easily explained or dismissed. Officers arrived quickly and sealed off the area. The quiet residential street became a crime scene. The murder squad was called in. What followed would grow into the largest investigation London had ever undertaken at that time. While officers worked through the early hours of the investigation, Sally's family remained unaware. Detectives were tasked with delivering the news to Sally Ann's family. At her mother's house,
I heard the door knock and I just assumed it'd be Sally Ann. I was sort of panicking, thinking, oh God, the door's all locked up, she can't get in. And I looked out the bedroom window and saw 2 policewomen in uniforms and a guy in a suit. So obviously went downstairs, opened the door, and the gentleman in the suit said, are you Mrs. Bowman? I said, yes. He said, do you have a daughter called Sally Ann? And the first thing I said was, what have they done now? Because I knew the sisters had been out together. And he said, can we come in? So I said, yep. And as I walked around into the lounge, I hadn't even sat down. And the next thing I knew, he just said, she's been killed, stabbed to death. And I just remember screaming.
The shock was total. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this moment. Sally's sister, Michelle, was informed shortly afterward. She would later describe feeling as though something inside her left that day.
I just remember this look in their eyes where you just know there's something that's not quite right. And they said, oh, do you know Sally Ann? I said, I'm really sorry to tell you, but Sally was found murdered this morning. And I remember something leaving me that day. And it's never ever come back, because she'll never come back.
The family faced the unimaginable task of formally identifying Sally's body. For a brief moment, Michelle thought it might not be her.
I went with Mum to go and identify Sally. I'll never forget, I just remember it standing in the car park out the back and you can hear them wheeling her through. And that thing just taking over, just wishing that it's not her. I remember going into the room and for that split second, I thought it wasn't her because her hair was dark. And then I moved forward and you just see a little button nose and a little freckle. And that was it. Part of me didn't want to look. I could feel Michelle behind me, and as I looked round, I just fell to pieces. My Sally laying there in a black zip-up body bag up to her neck. Her hair all tied back off her head where her hair they'd washed the blood from her hair. And I see a tiny wound to her neck. And Michelle was just screaming and crying, asking me to wake her up. Please wake her up, Mum. And it was just horrendous. But all I could do was touch the glass. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere near my daughter. And all I wanted to do was hold her and kiss her, but we weren't allowed.
By the end of that morning, Sally Ann Bowman was no longer a young woman who had not come home yet. She had become the center of a murder investigation. And the question investigators now faced was simple, but terrifying. What had happened in those few minutes on Blenheim Crescent when no one was watching? The answers did not come quickly. In the hours after Sally Ann Bowman was found, investigators focused on the narrow window between her leaving the car and the moment the street fell silent again. The scene suggested everything had happened suddenly. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle along the road. Whatever occurred unfolded fast, in a place that should have been safe. Sally had been attacked just meters from her front door. The forensic picture was brutal. She had been stabbed multiple times, wounds that made it clear this was a violent attack delivered with force. There were also signs that she had been sexually assaulted after death. On her body, investigators found bite marks, small details that would later become critically important. From those marks, DNA was recovered. At the time, no one yet understood how significant that evidence would become. The street itself offered very little. There were no clear eyewitnesses, no CCTV capturing the moment of the attack, no immediate explanation for how someone could get to her so quickly, strike, and vanish without being seen. The silence after the scream had wiped away almost everything. As the day went on, investigators widened the net. Officers canvassed neighbors, traced movements, and listened for any detail that might have been missed in the night. The witness who heard the scream and later saw a man walking away became a key reference point, but the description was limited: a figure, a direction, nothing more. Attention quickly shifted to the last person known to have been with Sally. Her ex-boyfriend, Louis Sproston, had driven her back toward home in the early hours.
He was your typical teenage boy. He went out to work, he worked. He had a lot of respect for Sally Ann. They were the perfect couple. They were like the Posh and Becks. They had their moments. They were teenagers. They used to argue and bicker, but then who doesn't?
They had argued. He had dropped her off.
Very quickly, we identified her ex-partner, Louis Sproston, as someone who was a possible suspect. Murder detectives were given the task of basically finding Louis Sproston that afternoon. They managed to find him with a brother and a friend of his.
He was approached by police officers asking him if he was Louis Sproston. He said yes. And because he'd had a tiff with Sally that night and he'd driven off from the driveway, he said, "Oh, is this because we've had an argument?" Immediately, alarm bells, I presume, went off. And they said, "Louis Sproston, you are being arrested for the murder of Sally Ann Bowman." And he had no idea.
Here we had someone who had sort of acknowledged that he'd had some form of argument with Sally that night and literally put himself at the scene at the time of the murder. And there is only one way to manage someone like that with an investigation, and that is to arrest them as a suspect for the murder. And that's what happened.
He was identified quickly, located, and brought in for questioning. His DNA was taken. For a brief moment, the case seemed to be moving toward a familiar ending, one shaped by proximity, emotion, and timing. But assumptions are not evidence. While Louis was being questioned, the forensic samples were sent away for analysis. Investigators waited. The family waited. The entire city watched as details of the case spread across the media. Fear settled over South Croydon. A young woman had been killed on the very street where she lived. The idea that something like that could happen so close to home made people uneasy, checking locks twice, looking longer down roads that had never felt threatening before. Then the results came back.
It was a phone call from the Forensic Science Service, which basically said, "Stuart, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is we have a match to the DNA profile from your crime scene. The bad news is it matches to another crime, another sexual assault 4 years before, only a mile and a half away in Purley."
A crime that had never been solved, a profile with no face, a name that did not yet exist. In that moment, the case changed direction completely. This was no longer the story of a breakup gone wrong. It was the story of someone else, someone close enough, bold enough, and hidden enough to strike without warning and then disappear back into the quiet. Once the DNA result landed, the investigation entered a different kind of urgency. The genetic profile taken from Sally Ann Bowman's body did not lead inward toward her personal circle. It led outward back into an old, unsolved crime.
The attack from 2001 was another truly horrific sexual assault on a woman. A lady who was in a phone box making a phone call when the suspect walks over to her, tries to get into the phone box and masturbates over the phone box.
He manages to get the door open and then ejaculates over the floor of the phone box and then casually walks off across the car park of Tesco's away from her.
That remained an unsolved police investigation, despite the fact that DNA was obtained from that crime scene. And I say it's the dawning realisation that if the attacker has done that 4 years before, and then 4 years later murdered Sally in a truly horrific way, what has he done in that intervening period? And if he has brutally murdered Sally now, what might he do tonight? What might he do tomorrow?
The case went cold. Now, 4 years later, the same DNA had surfaced again. Investigators were forced to confront a chilling possibility. If the same person was responsible for both crimes, then Sally's murder was not an isolated act. It was part of an escalation. The question was no longer only who killed her, it was how long this person had been operating without being stopped. As officers re-examined the final hours before Sally's death, another crucial detail emerged. Less than an hour before Sally was attacked, another woman had been assaulted on Sanderstead Road, not far from Blenheim Crescent. It was around 3:30 in the morning. She had just gotten home from work and pulled her car over. She was standing on the street.
This was a lone woman who was standing in the street on a mobile phone when she describes a lone male walking towards her.
What follows is how that survivor later described the attack.
He looked normal. He looked a nice young lad. I looked down and I saw a knife, and he just looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry." And that's when he took the knife and he raised it up, and I just followed the knife going up in the air, and I looked up and I watched it come down on me. He hit me twice on the head and he cut me across the face, and I then eventually put my hands up to protect my face and he cut me across the knuckle.
A taxi appeared at exactly the right moment, forcing the attacker to flee, but as he ran, he grabbed the woman's phone and tore it away. The call was still connected. The person on the other end of the line heard everything.
I'm very lucky. Things could have ended up an awful lot worse for me. And I feel guilty that I survived and somebody else didn't.
From the survivor's description, officers released an electronic facial composite.
We had a reasonable description.
He's described as a white man in his 20s or 30s, between about 5'9" and 6 foot. He's of proportionate build with short, dark hair.
And then we had the local connection. 2 known attacks, plus the woman who was attacked earlier on the night, all in a very small area of Croydon.
Tips poured in, leads were chased, none of them led to an arrest. At that stage, police had a working list of roughly 22,500 names to review. They launched an enormous door-to-door operation, approaching around 6,000 homes in the area around Blenheim Crescent, trying to account for every young man matching the description who had been staying locally on the night of the murder.
We have so many techniques identifying people through forensics, but there is no substitute for knocking on people's doors and finding witnesses, and also finding potential suspects.
They also initiated one of the largest voluntary DNA screening campaigns in the history of London's Metropolitan Police. Investigators believed the offender was local, someone who knew the area well. Men in the neighborhood were asked to voluntarily provide their DNA, with the hope that even the smallest match could help tighten the net around the killer. Over the course of 2 tense weeks, nearly 800 men came forward to be swabbed, and every day it took place, Linda Bowman, along with Sally Ann's sisters, was there, quietly standing in the background, watching man after man walk through, waiting for the moment justice might spark from a single sample. The chance that the killer would volunteer was low. Even so, police hoped someone close to him might appear instead, a brother, a father, someone whose DNA might produce a partial match and point them in the right direction. Months passed. The pace of the investigation slowed. The fear stayed. A murderer had walked away unseen, and the city had no clear sense of where he was or when he might strike again. For detectives, the pressure became suffocating. In March of 2006, officers made a strategic decision. They would go back into the past one more time. They returned to the victim from the 2001 telephone box assault and asked whether she could now help produce an updated facial composite. It was released alongside fresh public appeals. With the family's permission, police also spoke openly about the level of violence inflicted on Sally, making one thing unmistakably clear: the man they were hunting was extremely dangerous. Then, far from Croydon, the break finally came. In Crawley, nearly 20 miles away, an unrelated incident exposed the identity of Sally Ann's killer. 9 months after the murder, a man was arrested following a drunken fight outside a pub in Surrey. CCTV captured the altercation. His name was Mark Dixie. He was arrested for assault and taken to Crawley Police Station. As part of routine procedure, his fingerprints and DNA were taken. He was then released on bail. At the time, police believed Dixie was responsible for nothing more than a simple pub fight. They had no idea how important that DNA sample would prove to be. His DNA was sent to the Forensic Science Service for processing. 12 days later, the result came back. It was a perfect match to the DNA found on Sally Ann's body. Up until that moment, Dixie's name had never come up in connection with the investigation, not once. The man identified by the match was 35 years old.
I think probably the first thing that probably went through my mind was, thank God, 9 months has been a long time for everyone connected to Sally Ann or to the investigation. And then it's the exhilaration of, we now know who he is, we now need to find him. Who is Mark Dixie?
It was so important to get as much information about him as possible. Where did he live? Where did he work? Was he married? Did he have any children? Where was he going to be so we could arrest him?
We received an email from the laboratory that we had actually a DNA hit identifying our offender, who we believed was our murderer.
When the call comes in, setting aside that short-lived feeling of elation, the big question then presents itself, well, where is he?
As police followed the trail, they discovered that Dixie was no longer in the country. After being arrested for the pub fight in Crawley, he had left the United Kingdom and traveled to Amsterdam. The timing immediately raised alarms. Investigators believed they had finally identified the man responsible for Sally Ann Bowman's death, only to find that he was now beyond their direct reach. Months passed before Dixie returned. After an argument with his landlord in the Netherlands, he came back to England and resumed work as a chef in a pub. That detail deeply concerned police. A man suspected of carrying out a frenzied knife attack was now working daily with direct access to knives. Surveillance was put in place. Officers moved quickly to the pub where Dixie was employed. When Dixie stepped outside the building, police closed in and arrested him. According to the arresting officer,
it was whilst this plan was taking place, we were walking through the car park at the back of the pub, walking to one of the side entrances. And that is when we realised we've identified Mark Dixie, we've had his photograph, we knew what he looked like. And that's when we immediately arrested him. It was during that arrest I actually put my hand, across his chest to make sure that he didn't run away. I could feel his heartbeat, and his heartbeat didn't even change. I had expected, some form of reaction from him, but I think it really just went to show what a chilling, detached individual.
Mark Dixie was taken to Sutton Police Station, still wearing his white chef's uniform. Inside the interview room, Dixie remained detached and uncooperative.
Tell me your full name, Mark Philip Dixie.
Seated beside him was an appropriate adult, a woman assigned to ensure the interview was conducted fairly and that Dixie understood his rights. She was a community volunteer, brought in to safeguard the process and help interviewers remain objective. Despite her presence, there was no connection.
Obviously, you're going in there and you're sitting opposite someone who has committed such a horrendous crime. You've seen the photos of what he had done to Sally, and it is hard not to be emotional, but you've got to ensure that you do your job properly.
Dixie stayed closed off.
Tell me what you know about the murder. No comment. Were you there at the time of the murder? No comment.
He was the same throughout, and that was one of the worst bits. He showed no emotion whatsoever.
She's received an injury to her hand, which tells us that she's grabbed hold of the knife while she's being attacked.
He viewed that photo for what appeared to be a considerable amount of time, looked at the ground, and again, no comment. And as soon as he did that, I knew he had committed that offence.
By the end of that night, Dixie was formally charged with the murder of Sally Ann Bowman, but the horror did not end there. To fully bring Dixie into the light of justice, police needed to understand everything about his life.
Mark Dixie was born in 1970. He lived in Streatham for a number of years before he moved to a children's home in Sidcup.
At the time of his arrest, he was the father of 3 children. He had separated from his partner and was renting a room inside the very pub where he worked. Friends described Dixie as larger than life, outgoing, charismatic, the life and soul of the party. Most unsettling of all, no one who knew him believed there was anything unusual about him. Dixie was prosecuted for the murder of Sally Ann Bowman. Later, he admitted to sexually assaulting Sally's body.
Mark Dixie's defence was that he wasn't the murderer. There was another murderer still unarrested, undetected, but he was the rapist, that he came across what he believed was a drunk girl laying unconscious in the street on the driveway, and he thought he'd seize his opportunity to have sex with her.
The trial took place at the Old Bailey in February of 2008.
When he was telling this to the court and the jury, with Sally's family listening, it really, with so much, and this is my phrase, so much contempt, as if to say, well, what's wrong with doing that?
I remember watching him he had no remorse on his face. He didn't care what he'd done. It was pleasure for him to see that we're all sitting there hurting. He didn't care. He just wanted to see us squirm while we sat there and listened to what he had to say. He's an animal.
Jurors heard the DNA evidence. They heard about the sexual assault from the year 2001. They also heard testimony linking Dixie to violent crimes committed in Australia during the 1990s, including a knife attack and a sexual assault that left a young woman seriously injured. What emerged was not the picture of a single, isolated act of violence, but a pattern that stretched across years and across countries. In the end, the jury rejected Dixie's account. He was found guilty by a unanimous verdict. The sentence was mandatory life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 34 years. It was one of the longest minimum terms ever imposed for a single murder in the United Kingdom. Dixie would not be eligible for parole consideration until he was at least 70 years old. For the court, the legal process was complete. For Sally's family, justice had arrived, but far too late to restore what had been taken. In Cameron Park, a quiet, well-kept suburb in El Dorado County,
911, what's your emergency? I'm calling to report a fatality.
Police received a 911 call at 10:30 in the morning on February 27, 2012. The call came from a neighbor who contacted emergency services after a man in visible distress appeared at his front door. The man said only one thing with absolute certainty: his wife was dead.
What happened there? My understanding it was a domestic dispute, fight, confrontation. Okay.
When officers arrived at the scene, they found Todd Winkler sitting on the front steps of his home. His hands were clasped tightly over his head. He appeared completely overwhelmed. Police recorded this audio of Todd Winkler surrendering.
Sheriff's office, walk towards me. Walk to me. Keep your hands up where I can see them. Stop right there. Turn around. Put your hands on top of your head. Drop down to your knees. Keep your hand on top of your head. You understand? Yes, I do.
An officer asked a simple question.
Who else was inside the house? There's someone else inside the house, sir. Where's your wife? My wife is inside the house. They said nobody else was inside though. My wife is dead.
Where is your wife? She's in, when you enter the house, you turn to the right, the first bedroom on your right. And you sure she's dead? I'm positive. How can you be, how are you sure? No pulse, no breathing.
The contradiction was small, but it mattered. Officers noticed fresh cuts and scrapes on Todd's hands. They were not serious injuries, just enough to be visible. Nearby, his 3 young children were not inside the home. They had already been taken to a neighbor's house, supervised and safe, as if the morning had been carefully arranged before the call for help was ever made. Todd explained that a conflict had occurred several hours earlier. He said his wife attacked him. He said what followed was self-defense. He said he was in shock, but the timeline quietly raised troubling questions. If the incident happened in the early morning hours, why was help not called until late morning? What had really happened inside the house during those hours? When officers entered the home, the scene did not feel chaotic or panicked. It felt controlled. In one bedroom, a woman lay on the floor. Nearby was a pair of household scissors, positioned in a way that seemed almost intentional. In other areas of the house, more details slowly came into view. In the laundry room, a toddler's onesie carried fine specks of blood. In the living room fireplace, a fresh layer of ash coated the bricks, a clear evidence that something had recently been burned. Outside, Cameron Park remained quiet. Lawns were neatly trimmed, streets were still. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested violence. But inside the house, the evidence told a very different story. And it left investigators with a question they could not ignore. If this was self-defense, why did it look like someone had spent hours trying to make it appear that way?
Mother of his 3 small children.
Rachel loved life. Rachel loved life. She was beautiful.
and loving. She was an amazing person. She was an angel.
Before police arrived in Cameron Park that morning, Rachel Winkler's life followed a rhythm that appeared ordinary on the surface. She was 37 years old, the mother of 3 young children. A woman who spent most of her time managing the quiet responsibilities of family life, while increasingly longing to build a future that felt like her own. Friends and co-workers described Rachel as capable, reserved, and practical, not dramatic, not impulsive, the kind of person who thought carefully, especially when it came to her children. Rachel was married to Todd Winkler, a former military pilot.
Todd Winkler is a graduate of the Air Force Academy. He's an Air Force fighter pilot who's been stationed internationally. He's a wealthy pharmaceutical executive. Comes across as very friendly, jogging around the neighborhood with his small children.
From the outside, the family appeared stable. They lived in a well-maintained suburban neighborhood. Todd earned a high income.
Because he seemed like a fun guy, and he always was courteous, kind, and respectful of me.
The children were young, healthy, and well cared for. From a distance, there was little to suggest instability. But daily life inside the home told a quieter, more troubling story. In the years leading up to her death, Rachel began seeking independence. She took a job at Cameron Park Airport, working in an environment with structure, social connection, and financial purpose. It was a small step, but a meaningful one. For Rachel, it was not just about money. It was about control over her own decisions. The job also brought Rachel into contact with people outside her marriage, co-workers who saw her regularly, people who noticed changes in her mood, people who heard her speak about pressure at home, even though she rarely used harsh language. Rachel's marriage to Todd gradually grew distant. Todd often lived separately during the work week, renting an apartment closer to his job and returning home only on weekends. This arrangement left Rachel largely responsible for the household and the children on her own. Financially, Todd maintained control. Rachel did not have free access to money. Even basic household expenses often required permission. This was not framed as punishment or threat. It was presented as order, discipline, responsibility. But the effect was clear. It isolated Rachel, limited her independence, and reinforced the imbalance she felt every day. Todd's absence during the work week only deepened that divide. While he stayed near his job, Rachel remained in Cameron Park, raising 3 children almost entirely on her own. The distance created space but not relief. Rachel began sharing more of her private fears and concerns with James White. James and Rachel met in September of 2009, when Rachel began working as an airport manager. James White was a former Marine who had served during Operation Desert Storm.
We have an automatic pistol that shoots a rimmed revolver cartridge.
He was also a gun enthusiast and a trained fighter, a tough man by reputation, yet unexpectedly sentimental when speaking about Rachel Winkler.
I felt like we were a family. I felt like we were one heartbeat. You know, our hearts were intertwined together like I can't describe. Indescribable love. Never loved someone so intensely in my life.
The woman he called the love of his life.
She had a beautiful smile, she had a magnetic personality, and she was just absolutely perfectly nice.
Even years later, he still listened to her old voicemail messages.
I love you. Take care. Bye.
At that time, Rachel's marriage to Todd was already on the verge of collapse. Within a few months, she and James began an affair. Later, one of Rachel's closest friends would say that Rachel had been genuinely happy during that period.
She seemed happier.
Rachel confided in her best friend, Brandy Stanley, that she loved James White, but felt guilty about the idea of divorcing Todd Winkler.
She wanted to do right by God and stay married, but she didn't know if that was something she could actually do.
Todd eventually discovered the affair and, by all accounts, attempted to win his wife back. But Rachel had come to recognize a side of Todd that frightened her.
Actually, the last thing she ever said to me was, "I've realized that Todd's a pathological liar, Brandy." And then she ended the phone call pretty quickly and said she'd call me later, and later never came.
Rachel spoke of feeling controlled, emotionally isolated, and financially restricted. She did not describe constant physical violence. Instead, she described a marriage that left no space for her to exist on her own terms. There were also signs that Todd's relationship with the truth itself was deeply unhealthy. Rachel confided that Todd had a tendency toward manipulation, using stories to shape how others perceived him.
She says, if anything ever happens to me, I want you to look at Todd. And I want you to look at my kids when they get older and tell them how much I love them.
In one particularly disturbing example, she claimed Todd once pretended to have cancer. He shaved his head and eyebrows and used cosmetic products to imitate the appearance of someone undergoing chemotherapy. The performance drew sympathy and provided excuses for his absences. When the story ended, there was no illness, just another explanation quietly abandoned. At the time, these behaviors did not raise alarms outside the marriage. They were private, unverified. Easy to dismiss as exaggeration or temporary stress, but taken together, they formed a clear pattern: control, deception, and image management. As Rachel's plans to leave became more concrete, that pattern grew more dangerous. Divorce meant exposure, loss of control, financial consequences. It meant the carefully constructed version of life Todd had maintained would no longer hold.
She told me that she lived much worse off than anyone that she knew, but her husband made more money than most people she knew.
On the night before her death, Rachel completed the divorce paperwork. These documents were not symbolic. They were legally meaningful. The decision had moved beyond thought and into action. The following day, she planned to tell Todd she was leaving. Rachel was preparing to step away from a life defined by control. Todd was only hours away from learning that his authority over his family was about to end. And in cases like this, the moment control is threatened is often the most dangerous moment of all. In the final weeks of Rachel Winkler's life, the pressure inside the marriage had reached a point where it could no longer be hidden beneath routine. Rachel was no longer just thinking about leaving. She was preparing to act. She had a job. She had entered a serious relationship outside her marriage. She had completed divorce paperwork. Each step weakened the control Todd Winkler had carefully maintained for years. To Rachel, these steps represented escape. To Todd, they represented loss. According to testimony later presented in court, Todd's response to this shifting balance was not open confrontation. It was tighter control behind closed doors.
The last day I saw her, she said, I don't feel comfortable with Todd in the house anymore. And I'm not going to stay there with him when he comes home on the weekends. So, okay, stay with me and bring the kids.
Rachel described feeling financially suffocated, emotionally cornered, and increasingly monitored. Todd's absence during the work week did not weaken that control. It reinforced it. Decisions still came from him. Money still flowed through him. Authority still rested with him. Rachel shared these concerns with James White. He later recalled that she did not sound panicked. She sounded resolved. She spoke about leaving as a necessary step, not an impulsive one. She was careful, methodical. She wanted stability for her children. But resolve can be dangerous when it threatens someone who survives on dominance.
The last thing she ever said to me was, I've realized that Todd's a pathological liar, Brandy. I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around what happened.
Divorce was not just separation. It meant scrutiny, a legal process that questioned finances, behavior, and past decisions. It meant losing control over how others perceived him. In the early hours of February 27th, Todd claimed he entered the master bedroom to talk about the future of the family. He later said the conversation turned cold. He said Rachel told him she no longer loved him. He said she warned that if he tried to take the children, her new partner would intervene. What Todd described next was sudden violence. He claimed Rachel attacked him with scissors. He said a struggle followed. He said he was forced to defend himself. But the escalation Todd described did not align with the broader context investigators were uncovering. Todd was a professionally trained military pilot. He outweighed Rachel by a significant margin. There was no history of Rachel initiating physical violence, no record of prior attacks. And most critically, forensic evidence later showed that Rachel was holding her infant child at the time of the assault, a fact incompatible with the idea that she could have launched a sustained attack against a physically stronger adult. The escalation was not chaotic. It was controlled. After Rachel died, Todd did not call for help. Instead, hours passed. During that time, evidence later showed deliberate attempts to clean the scene. Blood-stained items were removed. Objects were burned in the fireplace. The nursery floor was wiped down. Injuries appeared on Todd's hands that forensic experts described as shallow and inconsistent with defensive wounds. this was not the behavior of someone paralyzed by shock. It was the pattern of someone managing consequences. By the time Todd reached out for help, his children had already been placed safely at a neighbor's house. The scene inside the home had been altered. A version of events had been rehearsed. The narrative of self-defense was ready. What investigators gradually came to understand was this: the escalation did not begin with a pair of scissors in a bedroom. It began months earlier, as Rachel's independence grew and Todd's control weakened. The violence was not a sudden explosion. It was the final act in a sequence shaped by control, deception, and the refusal to let go. And the most dangerous moment was not the argument itself. It was the moment Todd realized he was about to lose everything he believed belonged to him. The moment everything collapsed did not announce itself with chaos. There was no recorded emergency call, no neighbors reported screams, no witnesses observed a crisis unfolding in real time. What remained was a silent house and a sequence of actions that could only be reconstructed after it was too late. At some point in the early hours of February 27th, Rachel Winkler was killed inside the home she shared with her husband and children. The fatal injury was a deep cut to her neck, which forensic examiners later determined caused death almost immediately. Another cut was present near her eye. The wounds were precise, final. There was no indication of a prolonged struggle. One fact would later completely redefine how investigators understood that moment. At the time of the attack, Rachel was holding her youngest child. This conclusion was not based on speculation, but on physical evidence found elsewhere in the house. A toddler's onesie, recovered from the laundry room, carried a fine pattern of blood spatter. The stains were not transferred later through contact. They were consistent with blood released at the exact moment the fatal injury occurred. Rachel did not die alone. She died while protecting her child. After her death, the house did not descend into panic. Instead, time passed, hours passed, and during that window, the scene changed. Investigators later identified signs of deliberate cleanup. Blood-stained rags and towels had been used to wipe down surfaces, including the nursery floor. Some of those items were burned in the living room fireplace, leaving behind fresh ash despite the mild weather outside. Objects were repositioned. A pair of household scissors was placed near Rachel's body, in a location that appeared almost deliberately staged. These were not the actions of someone reacting without thought. They were the actions of someone constructing a story. Todd Winkler would later describe those hours as shock. He said he was overwhelmed and unable to think clearly. But shock does not organize children into safety. Shock does not burn evidence. Shock does not wait 6 hours before calling for help. When police finally arrived, Rachel's body lay exactly where it had been left. The scene carried a sense of absolute finality. There was no evidence of any attempt to save her. No signs of first aid. No call for medical assistance. No indication that Todd believed she might still be alive. The point of no return had passed long before. What followed was not an attempt to undo the tragedy, but an effort to control how the tragedy would be understood. The version Todd would later offer began here, in the silence after death, when decisions were made not to seek help, but to manage consequences. By the time authorities entered the home, the story Todd intended to tell was already in motion. And from that moment forward, the question was no longer what had happened inside the bedroom. It was why someone would go to such lengths to make it look like something else. Once the house was secured, the focus of the investigation shifted away from Todd Winkler's account and toward what the evidence could prove on its own. Investigators began by testing the version Todd had offered. He claimed Rachel attacked him with scissors. He said a struggle moved through the house. He said his injuries came from trying to disarm her. He said the blood on the child's clothing came from cuts on his own hands after he picked up the baby. Each claim was examined, point by point. The toddler's onesie became a critical piece of evidence. Laboratory analysis showed that the blood on the fabric belonged exclusively to Rachel. There was no blood from Todd. It was not transferred later. The pattern was consistent with impact spatter, meaning the blood was released at the moment the injury occurred. This directly contradicted Todd's claim that the blood was his after the incident. It confirmed that Rachel was holding her infant when she was attacked. Attention then turned to Todd's injuries. Forensic experts examined the cuts on his hands and fingers. In genuine self-defense situations, injuries typically appear on the forearms, the backs of the hands, or other areas instinctively used to block an attack. Todd's cuts were shallow and localized. They appeared more consistent with self-inflicted wounds designed to mimic signs of a struggle than injuries sustained during an actual confrontation. Investigators also documented signs of cleanup throughout the home. Blood had been wiped from the nursery floor. Towels and rags used in the process were missing. The living room fireplace contained fresh ash, despite there being no reason to light a fire. The conclusion was unavoidable. Someone had taken time to alter the scene. When detectives entered the master bedroom, another discovery changed the direction of the investigation entirely. Hidden beneath Todd's side of the bed, behind a nightstand, they found a small blue metal tin. Inside were human ashes. Records later confirmed the remains belonged to Kathy Winkler, Todd's first wife. Kathy had died 13 years earlier, in September of 1999, in rural Georgia.
Rachel found a box of ashes that were the ashes of his previous wife. And Rachel said, "I hope I never become ashes." And he said, "Well, just don't ever make me mad."
She and her sister, Christina Carlisle, were military children. Kathy was 23 years old.
She was easy on the eyes and had a nice personality, so she didn't have problems meeting guys. At the time that she met Todd.
And like Rachel, she had dated Todd only briefly before marrying him.
Kathy was sort of glowing, you know. I think he swept her off her feet, and he was going to be stationed over in Japan and wanted to take her with him.
She stood by him during a period of emotional collapse and brought him to a hospital in Hawaii.
She really wanted him to get therapy, and Todd was not interested in that, so she was concerned about that.
Eventually, they settled in Georgia, where Winkler began his own internet business. They were together for 8 years. Her death had been ruled an accident. In 1999, she and her husband were camping in a wooded area when her vehicle left a mountain road, plunged into a ravine, and caught fire. Todd survived without injury. Kathy did not.
We heard someone running through our campsite yelling, "Help, help, help, help." There was a guy that was saying his wife is dead.
The presence of Kathy's ashes in the home of Todd's second wife immediately alarmed investigators. It did not resemble a memorial, it was concealed, and it linked 2 deaths separated by more than a decade. Detectives in California contacted authorities in Georgia. When the name Todd Winkler surfaced, investigators there recognized it immediately. The story Todd had told in 1999 was reopened. Rick Johnson, who at the time was a deputy sheriff and one of the first officers to arrive at the scene, later recalled the crash this way.
There was 2 persons involved in the accident. One was at the top of the mountain and one was at the bottom of the mountain. One was in the vehicle, burned, and the other was at the top of the mountain without a scratch on him.
Todd told the deputy sheriff that Kathy had been speeding toward the hospital because he needed medical assistance. He claimed he was suffering from an allergic reaction caused by an insect bite, which forced Kathy to drive while he lay in the bed of the pickup truck. He said that when the vehicle went off the road, he was thrown clear as it plunged into the ravine. But Rick Johnson, who documented the incident at the time, later wrote in his report that Todd never showed officers any insect bite. He left the scene without a single visible injury on his body.
I don't believe he was bitten by anything. I think he's all self-inflicted.
The autopsy of Kathy Winkler revealed a very different truth. Her lungs contained soot and carbon residue, confirming that she was still alive when the fire began. She died from thermal injuries. She was burned alive. The fire spread with unusual intensity, raising early suspicions of accelerants, though at the time those suspicions could not be proven. The case was ultimately closed as an accident.
My questions I have are, did she suffer? Was she in a lot of pain when she passed?
Christina, Kathy's sister, later said she had always felt that something was deeply wrong in her sister's marriage. And Kathy's ashes hidden beneath a bed, the pattern could no longer be ignored. The investigation was no longer centered on a single act of violence. It expanded into a history of deception, control, and survival at the expense of others. What had once been viewed as tragedy began to look like opportunity. Financial records revealed that, after Kathy's death, Todd collected more than $1 million from a life insurance policy that doubled its payout if death occurred in a motor vehicle accident. Piece by piece, the self-defense story collapsed. What remained was a carefully constructed lie, undone not by emotion or confession, but by physical evidence and a past that refused to stay buried. After Rachel's death in 2012, Christina became convinced that Todd Winkler had once again escaped accountability for murder.
Perhaps if the investigation in Georgia had been thorough, that maybe Rachel would not have died.
The case against Todd Winkler moved forward with a weight few trials carry. It was no longer confined to a single morning in California. It stretched across 2 decades and 2 states, bound together by a pattern investigators argued could no longer be ignored. In September of 2014, proceedings began in El Dorado County Superior Court. Todd sat at the defense table as a man whose carefully maintained image had finally collapsed. His legal team's strategy never changed. They argued self-defense. They claimed Rachel was the aggressor. They insisted Todd acted only to save his own life.
And all of a sudden she's coming at him with a pair of scissors. There's a struggle. And he describes it as a struggle that takes some time, that she was one tough customer. This is not a murder case, ladies and gentlemen. This is a self-defense case, or at most, it's a voluntary manslaughter case.
The prosecution focused on something else: consistency. A pivotal ruling allowed evidence related to the death of Todd's first wife, Kathy Winkler, to be introduced at trial. Although her death had occurred 13 years earlier and had been ruled an accident.
There's an accident. The only witness was this defendant. She's found burned to death down a steep embankment where the car went, and the defendant is very fine with just a few minor scratches on him.
We, the jury, find the defendant Todd Allen Winkler guilty of the crime of first-degree murder as charged in count 1 of the indictment.